Hello everybody, it's vanburman here, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at the GTX 960. Thank you to everyone who voted on the poll for this, and it's one of the ones that I wanted to do because it's quite interesting to have a look at it compared to some of the other ones that I have had a look at recently. So this one, overall on the Steam hardware survey, came 12th. So it seems like a lot of people are still using this card, and I think, for good reason. You would expect it to be able to play most titles fairly well with reduced settings, of course. And this one is the reference blower style, which is probably going to perform worse than most of the other cards because it does run fairly warm even on an open test bench. I know that's how the blower styles operate, but still, it's noticeable compared to maybe an aftermarket solution. It is only the 2 gig version, and I think one of the things I've noticed with the lower VRAM cards is that there is a lot of RAM usage on the system RAM. So it would be really good for me to do a video at some point, get another card of the same, where I've got a 2 gig variant, get a 4 gig variant, and just see actually how that affects performance. Because for me, I don't know if there is a tangible difference or if I'm just presuming that there will be, because obviously the number's higher, so it must be better. We'll see. So kicking things off, almost literally, we've got Rocket League in the background. And as you can see, the scores are actually, pretty decent. We've almost got the 1% lows above 60 there, which would, in my mind, give it a perfect score. But, Left 4 Dead, you could obviously play 144 Hz if you wanted to. Rocket League, if you had something like a G-Sync or a FreeSync, well, G-Sync compatible FreeSync monitor, you could run that on quite a high frame rate very smoothly as well. And, I think it's definitely where this card is suited. If it will run Shogun 2 almost pretty much perfectly, I would say, then it's going to run pretty much all the modern ones fairly well. Be interested to see where it fits in, with something like Three Kingdoms, but in terms of like Rome 2, Attila, Thrones of Britannia, that sort of stuff, all those Total Wars, I would have thought would run perfectly fine, and even actually Three Kingdoms on reduced settings. But it's a good start for the card. It's obviously done where I would expect it to do for this, and yeah, no real gripes or issues with that. So I've been enjoying playing some more Doom, and luckily had the chance to play on the 960, which is nice. I had a really nice frame rate as well, especially for it being on Ultra, which was quite nice. Used OpenGL for this, obviously, because it's the NVIDIA card, but there were some pretty good scores across the board. I mean, obviously, if you were playing Shadow of War, you would reduce it to medium just to give you that extra headroom, but for very high, I think it does really well. It maintains over 30 average. The more importantly, the frame time is quite good, and the variance between 1% low and the average is quite tight as well. I didn't notice any issues with Doom whatsoever. You quite easily play that. And Grand Theft Auto 5, when you see the other two doing fairly well, you expect Grand Theft Auto 5 to fare, well also. But yeah, I think this is more where it sits, for the sort of like medium to high quality of games, with a few trade-offs. I mean, you could definitely get something approaching to 75 frames per second if you had a 75 Hz monitor for Doom and all that sort of stuff, from this card. And I don't think it's limited too much, even though it was using all of the VRAM for Doom. So this next one is a bit disappointing for me, because I had to give the GTX 960 full marks, which is not a good thing, for Final Fantasy 15, and that's because it didn't hit a 30 average, which, obviously we did the benchmark on high, which is so it's comparable to the rest of the graphics cards that have been done. But, had it been on standard, it would have obviously, and it did get over 30, but yeah, not quite powerful enough to play the latest Final Fantasy on PC, which is a bit of a shame to see that, considering as it did, serviceably well in Metro and The Witcher 3. It's the same sort of thing as I said previously in the medium benchmarks. If you reduce the settings a little bit and tweak it with this card, you can find a balance where you can still play pretty much whatever game you want fairly well. The 2 gigs of VRAM in Final Fantasy 15 severely limited it. I mean, you might be able to tell on the screen, but we're running at over 11 gigs of system RAM, which a lot of people won't necessarily have. You might be running 8 gigs of system RAM with this particular card, I would have thought. So I've actually provided way more headroom than it may otherwise get. And of course, that's notwithstanding for any of these cards, the fact that, in some games you might be more limited by your CPU as well. Having said that though, I think the card performed fairly well. And I think it'd be good for a good basis for future upcoming comparisons for cards, around this performance level. So we're now going to take a look at where the GTX 960 fits in overall, and for comparison I've used the GTX Titan because I thought that the results were quite interesting. So obviously the GTX Titan does win, and on paper it should win considerably. I think because of the way my scoring is slightly different to just being, just pure frame rates. There is a bit of nuance in there between the 1% low and the average. In this particular one, the margin is very slim, and in actual fact, the reason potentially that the GTX 960 loses is because it gains full marks for Final Fantasy 15 because it didn't hit a 30 average. Now, had it hit a 30 average with even a semi-decent variance, it would have beaten the GTX Titan in my testing. But, that is why those games are in there, and, that's why the scoring is in there. Because, you have to hit the minimum, otherwise what's the point? You can't run the game on those settings. It's just one of them. Decided to do Rise of the Tomb Raider. This game came out in later 2015. I think it's October, November 2015. And this card came out in January, of course. So it's more like, what can you expect from a game that came out in the same sort of time, year as? Hopefully this game would have been, Rise of Tomb Raider would have been made, to accommodate a 960 and a 950 and, the 9 series. And, playing it on high at 1080p ran really well. Average of 63.2, 1% low, 50.7. The variance there is, less than 13 frames. And, it tells. It was very smooth. You can see some of the gameplay in the background. Didn't have any stutters or anything like that. It, ran as well as you would expect. This is taken from the average of their in-game benchmarks, by the way. But, I had a bit of a playthrough as well. Played through the opening level just to see what it was like. Tried to kill Lara a few times. Not on purpose, mind, but it just happened. So we'll see some more comparisons with the Tomb Raider games in the future as well. For those of you that are interested, we've got the synthetic 3D Mark benchmarks. Skydiver was a 23,649, which, for example, if we're comparing these scores against the GTX Titan, which is, where I've drawn the comparison this time, because I thought it was quite interesting. The Titan scores much higher. It scores much higher on user benchmark. It's something like 40% better card, by their testing. We got 7,335 for Firestrike, which is actually pretty decent for a card of this power, and also given its lower VRAM as well. And then Time Spy, which is obviously much more difficult for these older cards, got 2,695. So feel free to compare that against your scores if you've got a 960. Hopefully you've got one which isn't a reference blower style, but there you go. They're the scores. At some point I think I want to do a comparison, between whether the synthetic benchmarks match up with, the scores that they get in my testing or not, because I think that would be quite interesting to, have a barometer between those two, but we'll see. So, in conclusion, what do I think? Well, I think for £15, it's pretty good. It has been slightly temperamental at times and not particularly wanted to have its overclock, even though pretty much for every game I was able to use it and play for a whole level or what have you. Other games it was not so accommodating. But I think it's a more than serviceable card. If there's something you've got in your system, you can expect to be able to play pretty much everything. With compromises, of course. I think that's to be expected for what is now, a nearly 5-year-old card. And I think it's one of those, as always, you've got to temper your expectations. I think the 2 gig holds it back. I don't know if it's even got enough power to utilise 4 gig properly, which I know was the big argument with the 770 when I bought my 770, which is something, you know, we will look at in the future. But no, I think if you're still using this, then you have no issue. It uses very low power as well, which is really nice to see. And yeah, it's more than competent. So I enjoyed doing this one. Thank you for the community vote. I'll be working on the next one, and there'll be a new poll out shortly with a new set for you to vote on. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. Bye for now.